afternoon. So nice of you to have me here today. I'm really excited. Hopefully not too many people are going to be napping after the lunch break. This is actually my first time in Brazil, which is really exciting for me. It's a beautiful country, beautiful city. But as we also know from a payment innovation perspective, it's just tremendously exciting to be in this market. Unfortunately, it's also an incredibly innovative market from a fraud perspective. I say sometimes half-jokingly that if it wasn't for Brazilian fraudsters, I wouldn't have a job. I would have to find another way to make a living, maybe as an Instagram influencer, which would not be really great. So I'm very grateful. But I'm here today to really talk to you about, how do we, as Visa, as partners of Visa, build capabilities that are global in scale, but are deployed at markets like Brazil to protect against these ever innovative and resourceful fraudsters. And so from a Visa perspective, why is this really important to us? It's, there we go. We just got hacked, guys. This is very exciting just in the moment. So it's really important to us to have security as the foundation of our payment ecosystem. There's a lot of talk about, again, innovation and new payment use cases and new players coming into the space. But if you, as a consumer, do not have trust, do not have confidence in how you pay and how you get paid, none of that innovation scales. And so for us, every payment innovation is really a security innovation, and that's what my team really focuses on at Visa globally. It's incredibly challenging to be in the fraud and cyberspace these days because there's such increasing complexity in terms of the ways that fraudsters can look to attack any point of the ecosystem. We saw a tremendous amount of digitization that happened globally as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, where a whole host of merchants and cardholders for the first time were making online and digital transactions, and fraudsters picked up on that and they started to adjust their methods and procedures accordingly to target this shift in consumer behavior. And you could see some of the core threats that we're looking and monitoring for across the global payment ecosystem. Now, I've listed some examples here on the slide, but if we were to take a step back and think about what are some of the core components that we're looking at, it really boils down to three key pieces, right? You have people, cardholders, merchants who are looking to buy and transact either online or in store. They are using a payment infrastructure, the second component, which consists of all the hardware, all the servers, all the physical terminals, or the online checkout pages at which we enter payment information in, that are exchanging data. All right, that's the third component. And so regardless of how the fraud changes, at its basic level, fraudsters are targeting one of these three components. And so we could see that in terms of attacks against cardholders or people. You see the increase in social engineering that we have seen year over year, where fraudsters are getting you to click on that link that they've sent in a suspicious email or text message so that they can harvest your personal information and then monetize it illicitly elsewhere. We can see attacks on payment infrastructure and the increase of enumeration attacks or malware and ransomware cases that we have seen globally over the last couple of years. Enumeration is a really interesting case where essentially a fraudster would take an automated script that runs hundreds of thousands of transactions in a split second, looking to guess the right account number, the expiry date, and the CVV2, so that when they get a successful hit, they can take that account and then sell it on the dark web or use it to buy a bunch of iPhones or monetize it some other way. And then the final piece is around attacks on data itself. And we've seen some really interesting evolutions that are happening in that space, where historically a lot of the focus on data was around payment credentials, right? The card number. Can I breach that and steal it from a merchant or from a cardholder? But we've done a tremendous amount of work over the last few years to make that data valued less by fraudsters through things like tokenization and EMV chip encryption. So what we have seen is that over the last couple of years, fraud that's coming from accounts that have been involved in a data breach has dropped significantly. So with that, again, the ever-innovative fraudster, what they're doing is moving further upstream into the transactions. They don't necessarily care about your credit card or debit card number. They care about your username and password. They care about your name, your date of birth, your address, so that they can create fraudulent accounts and applications that they can monetize illicitly as well. So you can kind of see the core is the same. It's these three components: people, infrastructure, and data, but the way that they're being targeted is changing and evolving from a fraud perspective. And in the end, you know, I'm a security professional, I love what I do, but at the end of the day, I don't do what I do for its own sake. To me, at the end, it's all about the consumer experience. It's about delivering security that enables seamlessness. And we know that it's incredibly important to deliver that secure payment experience because we know from our data what happens when a cardholder experiences fraud. So these figures are global in nature, but are consistent across all of our operating markets, where once a cardholder experiences a fraudulent transaction in their account, the likelihood that they're going to transact using that card drops significantly. And this is even more important for your most loyal customers if you're a financial institution. 62% of your heaviest card users start to either decrease the amount that they spend or they switch to another account after a fraud event. So all the investment, all of these efforts are really around consumer experience. How do we deliver the best one? How do we ensure that we have the right tools and capabilities in place to protect them? So how do we do that? So this is the fraud vectors are ever evolving and kind of ever changing, but the concept, the framework is the one that we've had for quite some time. And it's called a defense in depth model, where we create multiple layers of security to frustrate the fraudsters at every turn. Sometimes people are really concerned when they see this slide. They tell me, wow, Michael, all of your layers of defense have big holes in them. That makes me concerned. I say, no, that's actually a much more realistic depiction of what the real world is like. Because there's not going to be any one layer of defense that's perfectly solid, that's going to be a silver bullet to defend against fraud and cyber actors. What you want is a lot of slightly imperfect layers of defense that when you stack them together become a formidable barrier against these large-scale fraud attacks and data breaches. I won't go into an incredible amount of detail into every one, but just going to give you an idea in terms of how we're structured and why we're structured the way we are. Everything that we do starts on the left-hand side, which is around intelligence. Right? We are keeping an incredibly close eye in terms of what are the latest and greatest fraud schemes that are being discussed by these malicious actors on the dark web and their private Telegram chat groups, so that we can understand their psychology, their methodology, their tactics, and build capabilities that allow us to proactively detect what those gaps are so that we can close them for us and our clients. And so we can also build early warning systems that let us know that a potential fraudulent incident is happening minutes after it occurs so that we can stop it and mitigate any potential fraud losses. There is kind of that middle layer, which is around every entity within the ecosystem implementing its own set of decisioning rules that is mapped back to its own risk appetite. There are some clients who are very aggressive and are okay with accepting more transactions than somebody who has a more conservative risk appetite. But what we really want to do is provide those individuals with a security layer on top of that where we can see that performance of their rules. We can see the performance of their modules. And as that performance degrades, we can start to alert them and warn them ahead of time so that they can modify and update it accordingly. And then, when all else fails, because there's going to be certain moments when all of these layers will fail and you have to be prepared for it, we have a 24/7 always on team that automatically instigates these customized playbooks depending on the type of attack that we're seeing, and then alerts the client and or implements a preventative block on their behalf so that they're not suffering catastrophic loss, they're not suffering brand and reputational damage, and we're again continuing to maintain that safety and security and feeling of confidence that is incredibly necessary for innovative payment capabilities to continue to scale globally. So that's how the model works. It looks very nice, looks very fancy, it's very logical, right there on the slide. And by now, maybe a third of you have checked out and are now looking at Instagram and maybe seeing what's happening in this space. So what I'm going to do instead is talk about 3 specific examples. These are real-world scenarios that my team have handled in the recent past, and kind of talk you through what was the fraud vector that was actually being leveraged, what did we do about it, and how did we bring our capabilities from a data perspective, from an AI ML perspective, and from an operational resilience perspective to safeguard our clients. So, there we go. So what you're seeing here is our team that is monitoring merchant websites and looking at their checkout page. And as we're scanning the checkout page, what we're looking for is anomalous JavaScript code that could be indicative of a malware, and a specific type of malware. It's a malware that is skimming your payment data. So you are looking to buy flowers or chocolates or candy, and you think you're typing in your payment credentials, but what you're really doing is sending those payment credentials to a server that's controlled by a cyber actor who's then going to take that payment information and sell it on the dark web. This capability monitors for that, identifies that irregularity, and then we are able to locate the merchant and their website provider to make sure that this malware is removed and that exfiltration of payment data is prevented. Visa has an incredibly robust malware and ransomware library because we get involved in pretty much every significant data breach out there. If it hits the news, we've absolutely been involved. And as part of our process, we get samples of malware and ransomware script codes that we then are feeding into this capability, and we're constantly scanning these websites for the latest and greatest evolution of malware families. So it's taking kind of Visa's global view and then spreading it across all of the markets in which we operate. So we've identified this restaurant, and in this specific example, this was a quick service restaurant whose checkout page was infected. But of course, if we're putting ourselves in the mind of a cyber threat actor, they're probably not going to just target some random quick service restaurant for no reason. There is probably some greater scheme that they have in the back of their mind, because for them, this is a scale business. The more that they infect, the higher their return on investment is going to be. So we need to do a little bit more analysis and figure out if we've actually captured the full picture or not. And what we start to see is that as we go further upstream from this individual merchant, we start to see a whole host of other quick service restaurants that have this same malware on their checkout page that have also been infected. In fact, almost over 300 of them that we've identified. And what we find out through a forensic investigation is that the point of injection wasn't at that individual merchant. It was at the point of a service provider that was targeting this specific segment. So they were compromised, and then they were being used to inject a whole host of malware across their entire merchant portfolio. So we went to that service provider, we worked with them to remediate that infection, we shut down the 300 plus websites and made sure that that malware was cleaned out. And through that all, we were able to prevent that sensitive payment data from actually being pulled out and leveraged by these threat actors. And if you think about the cost that it would take to remediate a data breach like this, it's fairly significant. So being able to get ahead of it and keep those costs from being incurred by, these are small businesses. These are mom and pop restaurants that would have been impacted. It's a significant outcome for us and for those clients. So that's one example in terms of how we're using our data that we're aggregating at a global level and then incorporating that into our scalable tech infrastructure to identify proactively these potential cyber intrusions. Let's walk through another example. This is a very different one. So one of the things that we do at Visa is that we are monitoring every single transaction that comes at an account level and at a client level. And we're constantly looking for anomalies. We're looking for deviations from the mean. Sometimes those deviations are perfectly normal. There's a holiday, and so people are spending their money, or it's payday, and people want to go out and celebrate. But sometimes they could be indicative of a cash-out attack. It could be indicative of a highly organized scheme to defraud the financial institution and its cardholders. And so what you're seeing here is a significant amount of deviation in a specific channel, which is the ATM. A lot of high amount withdrawals are happening all over the country, and this is a little bit unusual given what we know of the behavior of these accounts. So we let the bank know. It's like, hey, we think there's something irregular happening. You should do something about it. Now, a lot of times when we alert our clients, they don't respond back. Sometimes, as this is the case in this specific scenario, this is right now 2 a.m. on a Saturday, which is another reason why we think this is really suspicious, because who's withdrawing a ton of ATM cash on a 2 a.m. on a Saturday? Sometimes it's because it's on the weekend. Sometimes it's because they themselves have actually been compromised and they don't see the messages that we're sending them, and so they can't action it. There has been a case, one of my favorites, where we actually got on the phone with the client, and the client told us, oh yeah, no, don't worry about it, everything is totally normal. And what we found out, we still shut it down, but what we found out later is the person that we reached at the bank who told us everything was normal was actually an insider who was part of the attack. So sometimes the client doesn't always action our alerts, and so we have to step in and block on their behalf. Now you might notice that counter on the left-hand side there. That's actually a real-time counter of how much cash is walking out the door on a per-minute basis. So on average, when these types of attacks occur, it's about $240,000 per minute in cash, which you're not going to get back. This specific attack, we stopped in about 2 minutes. They got away with $350,000, but if you think about what would have happened if it took us an hour, 2 hours to respond, it would be tens of millions of dollars that would have been lost to this financial institution and would have funded some very not great people in their nefarious activities. So this is really incredibly important in terms of our ability to, in real time, identify and action these anomalies. So that's kind of one example to talk through there. And then the last example I'll talk through is probably my favorite. So what you're seeing here is our Fraud Fusion Center in Ashburn, Virginia. It's literally built around a moat. It's a very impressive facility. And so as I mentioned, on any given day, we have tens of thousands of alerts that are coming into our system, right? All these anomalies, and of course, we don't have tens of thousands of people looking at them, so we are leveraging our AI ML capabilities to take all of these alerts coming from all of these different countries and aggregate them and give us some sort of insight about what's happening here. And so we use a combination of rules-based alerts that tell us when something is out of the ordinary and AI-enhanced detections that are using some very complicated statistical analysis to do something similar, and the combination of the two can be really powerful. So what you're actually seeing here are two different attacks that are now correlated and linked in our internal systems. You're seeing in the high bars, right there on the left, a large number of high-ticket transactions that are being approved at a crypto exchange. And then next to it, you're seeing a lot of small ticket transactions that are being attempted at a completely separate merchant, but have a high decline rate. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how could you kind of correlate these pieces? What do they have to do with each other? These are two separate, seemingly random incidents or events. But that's the power of that correlation engine that we have that lets us kind of separate the signal from the noise, if you will. What we are now doing is take a look at the accounts that are involved in these two different sets of alerts and seeing exactly what is going on here. And so what is happening is actually quite genius. These threat actors are carrying out an enumeration or a brute force attack on a small merchant. That's where you're seeing those high declines because they're attempting hundreds of thousands of transactions trying to get the right combination of the PAN. And despite the fact that a lot of them get declined, some of them do get approved. And as soon as they get approved, they now have a valid account. They don't care about that small merchant. All the merchant was doing was just validating inadvertently the accounts for them. But when that account gets validated, they then go to this crypto exchange and make several high-ticket transactions looking to purchase crypto. This is their monetization scheme, right? So in the previous example, the way that the threat actors were going about doing the monetization was through physical cash withdrawals from the ATMs. Now, that's quite challenging because you need human beings that are going to ATMs, withdrawing cash, and carrying cash, which is quite heavy. It's always kind of interesting to me seeing the heist movies where people are just walking around with tens of millions of dollars in bags, not understanding that the real life weight of all that cash is in the tens and hundreds of pounds. So that's pretty complicated, it requires a lot of sophistication. Here, what they're doing is actually monetizing it using digital cash, using Bitcoin. And what is happening behind the scenes is that as they make those crypto transactions on the exchange, they're then taking that crypto, going to the dark web, buying more breached accounts on the dark web. They go back to that merchant I was talking about. They test those accounts to see which ones are valid and which ones are not. And then they take the valid ones and go and buy more crypto on the exchange. And they go around in circles and circles and circles, right? Two separate attacks, but very much interlinked by the analysis that we were able to run in the back end. And so we, of course, went through our automated playbooks that I had discussed before, where we alerted the financial institutions to let them know these accounts have now been compromised. They need to be shut down. We told the bank for this crypto merchant that they should not allow those funds to be dispersed, so you need to hold on to those funds, right? And then we worked very closely with law enforcement to kind of identify some of the data signals around this attack and worked closely with them to kind of start some investigations and some surveillance on the people behind it. All in all, that specific attack was successful in getting about $5.5 million worth of crypto approved in a fairly short period of time. But because we were able to identify it so quickly, we stopped settlement, and there were $0 in fraud losses that were incurred by any of the folks involved. So that's kind of a key piece in terms of how we think about these capabilities. It's taking our global level view of data, running that through some fairly sophisticated AI ML models, and then building automated actions on top of it that allow us to stop these attacks in their tracks before they are inflicting significant losses on our clients. Well, actually, I'll just say one more thing, because I am in Brazil. 1 out of the 3 examples I talked about today, one was in Brazil. I won't tell you which one, but one of them was based out of Brazil. I'm telling you, you guys keep me in business. So, um, so we kind of talked a lot about, here are some examples in terms of what we have done, how these capabilities work, the real impact that they've had in the kind of the global ecosystem, but also on a specific regional market level. What should you take away? What should you be doing? I think the really key part for today, like right now, is really understanding where the vulnerabilities exist in your organizations. And I'll give you kind of maybe a cheat answer. The vulnerability exists in each and every single one of you, because the key entry point for most of the significant fraud attacks that we see is around human beings. That highly coordinated ATM cash out attack that I showed you earlier, it wasn't some sophisticated hacker in a basement somewhere getting access to the bank system and then shutting it down. How it started was a bank's employee was targeted through LinkedIn with a very appealing job posting. They clicked on the link to apply to that job, but what they didn't know is that link ended up downloading a bunch of malware into their machine, which was then used to gain entry into their account and then move laterally across their organization systems that allowed them to lower the rules governing ATM transactions and increase the amounts for ATM withdrawals. And that's how they were able to take out almost $240,000 per minute in that attack. So it's very much around kind of understanding the access controls that every individual has within their organization, whether they're at the right level or not, and then continuing to engage in employee education because they are going to be that front line to help deter many of these attacks. There's a whole host of other vulnerabilities that exist within the systems themselves. There's configuration settings and decisioning rules that have not been checked or updated or modified for months and years. And as we speak today, there's probably a group of very innovative and, let's say, hardworking threat actors that are looking for that specific gap in your rule and in your decisioning logic to try and exploit. So employee education and then red team testing or ethical hacking of your own processes, of your own rules, is a really key thing to get started on. 3 months from now, continue to educate employees, but also expanding into your partner network, right? We talked about that example of the restaurant that was breached, but the breach didn't happen at the restaurant. It happened further upstream at a service provider that they were using. Pretty much every entity that you're connected to is a potential point of entry. And the more entities that are coming into the market that are providing innovative solutions that are going to be tapping new market opportunities, incredibly exciting, but they are also a point of vulnerability. So how strong is your third-party oversight, and is it as strong as, and are your standards for your third parties as strong as your standards for your own organization? And then the longer-term view is really around focusing on authentication. Right? Authentication is going to be the key theme trend that we will have in security for the foreseeable future. We essentially created some really great authentication experiences and standards for the physical environment, but never really did the same for the digital environment. We just tried to transpose what we did in the physical channel over to the digital channel, and it just doesn't work. People have a lot of comfort in using passwords. Passwords are the least effective method out there because probably 80% of the people's passwords that are in this room today are available for sale on the dark web somewhere. But what we really need to do is kind of create some very sophisticated models around authentication behavior. What's your device ID? How often do you shop? Where do you shop? What IP addresses are you communicating with your merchant or financial institution from that allow us to authenticate consumers without them even being aware of it, right? It's all frictionless, it's all in the background. That requires a tremendous amount of investment in data, in technology, in implementation, in switching out legacy infrastructure. But in order for us to stay ahead of where the fraudsters are going, and in order for us to continue to deliver that seamless, frictionless consumer experience in the digital channel, it's going to be incredibly imperative for us to do that. Of course, in the interim, there is a whole lot of work that we could do around security controls, things that are kind of very basic, very foundational, that allow us to have a bridge or a stopgap between the today and the ideal future that we want to get to. Things around velocity controls, transaction controls, having different levels of safeguards in how you interact with your customers and cardholders, so that, again, if one safeguard fails, you have a whole host of others that you can rely on, and make sure that you're constantly making the investment for fraudsters as high as possible, because they are business people just like you are. And if you make it really costly for them to do business, they're going to go off and do something else. Maybe they'll go to coding boot camp and come join the good guys. And with that, thank you so much for having me and for your attention.